I'm an adventurer.
Really? You got that look about you. Funny, before I signed up with the Guard, I used to be an adventurer too. But then I took... never mind. You're not here to hear an old guard rambling on about better days. Go on inside. Just behave yourself and you'll be fine.
When it comes to real-time strategy games, some players define them through games like Age of Empires or StarCraft. However, sometimes a game comes out that shows that the genre can be more than just base building and unit management. What if an RTS had an in-depth story with upgradable heroes? What if it merged a role-playing game with a real-time strategy game? What if you had a game with an upgradable protagonist, base building, and giant armies? Well, the Spellforce series for nearly 20 years has been answering those questions, but the Spellforce franchise hasn't had the smoothest history. In particular, Spellforce 3 Reforced on console is an interesting game, because not only does it continue the RPG/RTS hybrid formula that Spellforce franchise is known for, it's also a story of a franchise that was bought by another studio. In 2011, Nordic Games, now called THQ Nordic, bought the Spellforce IP when the original publishers of Spellforce 1 and 2 filed for bankruptcy. So Spellforce 3 not only had to overcome the challenges for developing a RPG/RTS hybrid, which is a genre that you rarely see, they also had the challenge of trying to develop a game in a pre-existing world that they did not create. While it may seem easier to make a game in an already established universe, we've seen countless times other developers and films struggle to pull it off. Some people may argue that a pre-existing universe is easier to work with because it comes with a rough guidance on the characters in the world. However, it also comes with expectations. Instead of a blank canvas where you can hide your mistakes, a pre-existing universe has parts of the world that need to be painted by the numbers, but also be original enough to engage the audience. So why do I bring this up? Because Spellforce 3 Reforced on console is not a perfect game, but even with some of its minor flaws, it is still an experience that any console strategy fan should play. Spellforce 3 on console is proof that with enough care, a new studio can move a franchise forward. But what is Spellforce 3 Reforced, you may be asking? And how does it play on the console? Well, let's have a look. So to change pace for a second, after the success of Warcraft 2 in 1996, Blizzard began working on a point-and-click adventure game. But however, after the game did not meet their standard, they introduced some of those RPG features into the launch of Warcraft 3 in 2002. So why am I bringing this up? Because when playing Spellforce 3, it's hard not to make the comparison of what made Warcraft 3's campaign so great. Spellforce 3 Reforced has an epic fantasy world focused around a lead hero and giant armies. The game at times truly does feel like what Warcraft 4 could be. So what does that mean? Like I mentioned before, Spellforce 3 is a role-playing game / real-time strategy hybrid. You will have a hero character that you level up through a class skill tree. You will use abilities and even give him different gear and weapons that you can find. But at the same time, the game is also real-time strategy, where you build bases and armies to take out the enemy bases. Now, as for the game modes, like most RTSs, the game does have a skirmish mode, multiplayer, and a fully co-op campaign. However, where Spellforce 3 shines is its 30-hour campaign. So let's look at that in more detail. The campaign is based in a medieval fantasy world full of humans, elves, orcs, and other fantasy races. Think of the Lord of the Rings or Warcraft. The story is set 8 years after what is known as the Mage Wars. You get to see a cutscene that briefly explains that your character's father started a rebellion that he lost. After a brief tutorial and cutscene, you make a character and get to choose your appearance and skill trees. From there, you jump into the world trying to stop a mysterious plague. However, in typical fantasy fashion, you'll have plot twists and get to explore a fantasy world full of different lore. While playing, you'll form a party of unique heroes and create armies. Party members are fully voice acted and have their own stories that relate back to your character. For most of the RTS parts, you will get to choose which faction you like to use, and you can unlock the elves, the humans, or the orcs. Now to the campaign's main missions, they revolve around two major parts. There are the hero/party members only missions, and the RTS missions that also allows you to build bases and armies. Now to the credit to the game, it always tries to blend these two sections together. There's always an in-game reason why you need your army, and this is where you really get to see what makes the campaign such a great experience. One of the areas the game gets so right is its focus on the minor details of storytelling and world building. One of the best examples of world building is how it deals with the events that occurred before you started playing the game. So remember before when I spoke about how the start of the game has a brief cutscene that outlined the previous war that your father led? Well, as you're playing the campaign, you get to experience a world that's still coming to terms and living with the impacts of that war. You see this with the characters you meet throughout the world, immediately knowing who your father was, and you hear them talk about the impact his actions had on them in the world. This little detail makes the world feel more engaging as you see a world impacted by events before you started playing. You get to see how the characters around you are still trying to come to terms with what happened. More importantly, you get to understand the reasons and motives around what is happening in the main story through the characters of the world. While the main story may not be for everyone, you can tell they put a lot of effort into crafting it. Ultimately, the attention to story shows a game world that is worth not only playing, but exploring. You can further see this game's attention to detail in the world design. The world can truly look stunning as you see the epic scale of major cities like Greyfall and the dense jungles. The maps hold up to nearly any RPG you've played before. They are filled with different buildings and NPC characters. Seriously, check this out for yourself. Look at the narrow streets with merchants and buildings towering over. You can see the minor details they put into the towns to make them look like living communities. What really helps you understand the world is the game's side missions, where you can talk to the people of the world and take on fully voice acted side missions for extra gear and rewards. Like I mentioned before, these are a good way to start to understand the characters in the world, and in traditional RPG fashion, these missions, like the main story, also have different dialogue options. Speaking of dialogue options, most missions allow you to have a range of different dialogue choices. This can be from asking for more details about the overall world, or trying to get more details about your mission. Sadly, the vast majority of dialogue choices feel irrelevant, as the game wants to tell a very specific story. In saying that, some smaller choices may occasionally impact a side character here and there. However, ultimately, the main story beats will stay the same. While I would not really call this a game with impactful dialogue choices, it does provide opportunities to alter some minor parts. But story decisions aside, one of the biggest surprises of the game is the voice acting. The game is fully voice acted, and it's such a minor detail that makes a huge difference in drawing into the world. While playing the game, it makes you want to click on the dialogue and get to know the world deeper, and even get a better understanding of what happened before the game had started. Take a listen for yourself.
This is where the remaining Iskander loyalists are making their last stand. As you probably know, House Iskander was allied to your father during the Mage Wars.
Who let you in?
The gate was unguarded.
Really? Next thing you know, this place is being overrun by undead because the guards have all gathered to hear us bicker.
I know this might sound odd from orc to human, but I might need someone with your skills.
Now to actual gameplay. The individual character party gameplay plays as an isometric top-down RPG where you click to where you want your party to move. The combat is where you see a massive shift from a lot of traditional top-down RPGs. Because most games with this type of camera angle, character customization and skills normally go for a turn-based combat. So normally when I see a game like this, I think of Divinity's Reach or Wastelanders 3 combat. However, Spellforce 3 combat stands apart because your characters will auto-attack. But be warned, you still need to activate their abilities. So at first, you may become a bit overwhelmed with trying to activate your party skills while organising your units in combat. However, surprisingly, combat not only works, it feels engaging and fast-paced. And using your abilities in combat is also helped by the game slowing down as you bring up your ability wheel. Now when it comes to the abilities you're going to use, this ties into your hero's leveling system and character customization. As I mentioned before, you actually get to create the main protagonist, so this involves you customizing their appearance and choosing or even making your own class. The game has a range of skill trees from melee to archer based, different types of magic users, and even skill trees based on leadership. Now these skill trees felt amazing, that even after when I did my first campaign playthrough, I wanted to jump back on to try a completely different character build. But in saying that, that isn't necessary, as you can upgrade your party members just like your main character. This includes abilities and gear, so this allows you to try nearly every skill tree and have a deep range of abilities. I also found that by being able to upgrade my companions convinced me to try side missions, for not only the dialogue, but to get some gear to help upgrade my party. Speaking of the companions, be aware that throughout the game, you'll be able to unlock a range of different companions. However, you can only take 4 of them on missions. And, for story reasons, your character must be in the party. So overall, Spellforce 3 RPG aspects are a strong offering, and with its take on combat, it provides a solid point of difference compared to a lot of other story-driven top-down RPGs. But at this point you might be wondering, what about the RTS sections? So like I talked about before, the real-time strategy part of Spellforce lets you play as the elves, humans, or orcs. The game uses a zoomed-in camera with units and buildings taking up a large section of the screen. This means battles will feel a little different compared to other strategy games, as each unit takes up more of your screen. The RTS battles work in a territory-style system, where the map is divided up into zones, with each having a capture point and its own limited amount of resources. Each zone also has a limited number of villages. This means your bases will generally be spread across the map. You will build resource gathering and military buildings that villagers will need to be assigned to. To help you focus on combat, resource collection in the game is automated. As for the 3 playable factions, each has its own unique building style. However, they all play very similar to each other, with minor changes. So for example, elves are more defensive focused, the orcs are more aggressive, and the humans are a balance in between them. So in saying all this, the real-time strategy part of the game is enjoyable. It has your typical RTS start where you have your basic troops, and then you need to upgrade technology to gain access to more advanced buildings and troops. Each faction has a pretty strong range of troops. This can include infantry, archers, cavalry, siege, and magic-based units. Because of the camera angles and the unit scale, pacing of combat can feel very different. Also, for the campaign, you do not unlock more advanced units for a major part of it, so this involves you having to just create mass amounts of basic units. Now, this may not even sound bad to you. However, when you come against AI, they will be constantly auto-creating villages or continuously repairing buildings. All of this isn't helped that the individual unit technology, like the cheaper cost or higher attack for some units, has to be unlocked through side missions or bought by vendors. But overall, the game is not the most in-depth RTS. You don't have massive unit roster or even walls to build. But in saying that, that's not what Spellforce 3 is trying to be. It does the RTS section in a different style that works for the more hero-focused gameplay. And ultimately, as a hybrid RPG/RTS, is one of the best examples in the genre. Okay, console. So performance-wise, Spellforce 3 Reforced on console works surprisingly well. When it comes to controls, at first you may find it takes a minute to understand the button layout. This is because the game is trying to balance an RPG and RTS on the same controller layout. So for example, you will use your left trigger to bring up your building menu, and your right trigger to bring up your 12-slot hero ability wheel. This allows you to quickly activate your abilities in the middle of combat. One of the biggest hurdles I had when playing was when I started, I instinctively kept trying to move my troops with the A button. However, A button is to select, and Y is to issue commands / move units. The longer I played, the more I got used to these controls. And, to the game's credit, it does help that you have a window on the bottom right of your screen which shows you the button commands. For how helpful this little window is, it doesn't overcome a massive challenge of the game. The tutorial, especially on console, doesn't feel engaging, or even really help to guide you other than just a quick statement. I found this especially true when I was given the RTS parts of the game and was trying to figure out how to play as I went. For a game with such a focus on characters, voice acting, and story, it would have been nice to be given a more in-depth tutorial. Also, speaking of issuing commands, when using abilities on the console, it can be confusing to understand if the ability even activated. At times I felt like I need to click abilities multiple times. I would really love to see a version of this game that allowed for automatic skill activation for heroes. Overall, on console, the performance rarely had issues and one of the better RTS experiences on a controller. It doesn't feel as smooth of a control experience compared to Halo Wars or Age of Empires 2 on Xbox. However, it's still a well-ported game where I didn't feel disadvantaged by playing on controller. I felt like I was given the full Spellforce experience. And that's a really underappreciated part, because this game has to try and balance the RTS with RPG on a controller. It's a hard enough ask. A lot of RTSs can't even figure out how to use a controller properly. So for a game to have both those sections on the same controller layout is extremely impressive. While Spellforce 3 isn't the perfect RTS or RPG, it is an experience you can rarely find. It shows that real-time strategy games do not need to be defined by mass armies and micromanaging units. That an RPG/RTS hybrid can not only work, but a new studio can pick up an established universe and truly make it a game that is worthy of the franchise. And, even with all these hurdles, make a game that also works on the controller. For players looking for a competitive RTS, then Spellforce 3 Reforced may not be the game for you. But for people looking for an experience like Warcraft 3 campaign or Divinity's Reach, an experience unlike nearly any in gaming with its own unique perspective, then Spellforce 3 may be the game for you. Thank you for listening and please subscribe.